Hey everyone, it's great to have you along for this episode of the Inside Myanmar podcast. Let me take a moment to give you some background on our show. Historically, the origins of the meditation and mindfulness movement that have swept the world can be traced to 19th and 20th century Burma, now officially known as Myanmar. And still today, in the 21st century, the Buddha's teachings of liberation animate a contemporary generation of Dhamma seekers in this small Southeast Asian country. In this podcast series, we engage in in-depth discussions with a wide range of practitioners, foreigners and local Burmese, lifelong monastics and lay practitioners, including authors, scholars, meditators, teachers, pilgrims, and more, to highlight the depth and diversity of Buddhist practice in the Golden Land and explore how the Dhamma is being put into practice by those seriously on the path. That is our mission, and we hope that the show that follows gives you a fuller taste of our aim. Let's get into that now. Sebastian was first. That's right, Sebastian was actually the inaugural interview conducted for Insight Myanmar. Although you're likely not listening to his interview as the podcast's first episode, as Sebastian was the first to experience the new recording studio, the first transcript that our sound engineer processed, and the first interview that I conducted. So I'm grateful that he willingly was a guinea pig for us and threw himself into our little Dhamma experiment without really having any idea what we were about because, well, there was nothing before him. I had met Sebastian several years earlier when he and his partner asked me to help arrange a pilgrimage in Myanmar. I ran into him again last year while I was leading another pilgrimage, with Sebastian wandering into a secluded Sagaing Hills monastery just as we were taking off. He was looking for a quiet place to meditate for an extended time. And that's likely what Sebastian is doing as this episode goes to air, because soon after taking the time to sit with us, he left on yet another private pilgrimage to meet several teachers and take his own retreats here in Myanmar. Actually, just minutes before preparing this script, I saw a social media post of Sebastian sitting cross-legged in a large Dhamma hall, seeming the only foreigner with scores of Burmese yogis behind him. I think Sebastian offers a refreshing voice as an on-the-ground meditator, as he is perhaps more similar to many listeners than other guests who have come before, such as those who have pursued lifelong renunciation, rigorous academic study, or are teachers in their own right. Sebastian shows what is essentially possible for any meditator anywhere. Check out of your normal flow of life for an extended period, put on a rucksack and board a jet plane to Burma, and hop around the Golden Land as a Dhamma bum, soaking up the wisdom of a deeply devout Buddhist culture. His interview thus represents a kind of armchair pilgrim for the listener, and perhaps it will inspire some to get up off that armchair and eventually get up to some of the sights that Sebastian describes here. And although this was our very first interview on Insight Myanmar, we hope it will not be your last with us. I'm really happy to be talking now with Sebastien Le Normand, and he's just come to Myanmar a couple days ago. I think it's his third trip here. Is that right?
Third time, yes, in Myanmar. Yeah.
Third time, yeah. So he's a Frenchman who's currently living in Canada and taking extensive trips across Southeast Asia to pursue meditation and spirituality. So I wanted to hear a little bit about his travels and his experiences in the Golden Land. So first, I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about your background and what initially brought you to wanting to pursue meditation and spirituality.
I would say there have been two main stages in my life around that, and it started as a young teenager. I come also from the martial arts angle, and so I would say karate. Yeah, so that led me to discover Zen Buddhism, and felt quite impregnated by that, and I started to read about Buddhism, Buddha's teaching, discovering the history of the martial arts through the Kung Fu, through China, and back to Bodhidharma, and back to Buddha. And that inspired me so much that I decided to meditate on my own as a teenager, and that worked really, really well, and I got many good results. So that led actually quite my life all along until somebody mentioned vipassana to me when I was in Canada, and then it still took me 10 years to actually make the step, but then at my first retreat it went really, really well. So then I was set for the Dhamma path. Very clearly from the first retreat, exactly reminding me things that I had discovered on my own as a teenager, and how extraordinary they were. So,
when was your first retreat?
January 2013.
Okay, this was in the Goenka tradition?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so do you still practice martial arts today, or is it mainly
not per se anymore, yeah. It's almost like I moved on to less of the outer activity and more on the inner side.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So you say you took a Goenka Vipassana course in 2013, and that really worked for you. So I guess I'm curious if you could share how you settled on this practice, why you felt this practice worked for you, and what you've been able to get out of it.
I would say that exactly from back in the days as a teenager too, I had my own kind of principles in general in life, and one big one is that I like when things are the most simple, and I find often when you do the most simple is the most efficient. And I really enjoy to hear that through that the tradition of vipassana and Goenka emphasizes a bit on that. They say, let's keep it at the most simple practice. No rites, no rituals, just observe the breath, as also Webu Sayadaw would have, influenced that way with his own technique of just the breath, bare breath. And so I really enjoyed the fact that it was focusing on the most simple way of practicing, and that appealed to me. And exactly, again, I have my own karma that, was meant to lead me to that, but then it worked really well for me, so that's why. Right.
And so you've also chosen to prioritize spiritual practice and also the travel that you undertake to support that practice. And so I'm also curious how it's quite a big commitment to take frequent travels to be able to go to rural and distant locations to pursue spirituality. And how are you able to set up your life and structure your lay life so that you're able to support yourself and also support these travels?
I would say that Goenka would have said that Dhamma works. And so after my first retreat, some changes happened in my life, and basically some certain people showed up right there. And as I felt very committed at once to the path, then Dhamma life puts some people on your path, and then you attract certain kind of people who feel that you are really committed, and then they would really want to help you. And that motivated quite a few people to take the Vipassana course for themselves too. And they also felt that they benefited from it, so they wanted to give it back to me. So some people started to want to support me, and also as they felt that I had that strong commitment, and I also felt the pull to actually come to the places of origin or source of the practice. I had the feeling that would really inspire or emphasize or reinforce, the practice and the feelings and the depth. I wanted to come to those famous places as a pilgrimage, and it worked again. It really, I think it affected me for the good. And then people saw me coming back, with more like a glow on the face, and then they're happy to see that, and so they still want to support me that way, to give me the possibility to travel and have free time to come again to these places. So,
Yeah, and so kind of a follow-up question is, many Western meditators, they regularly take courses, but they also pursue their own jobs and livelihood in the area where they're from, and just integrate that into your life. And it seems like you've made a life decision to go beyond this and to want to pursue travel to remote places, sometimes difficult travel, sometimes places where you don't speak the language or know what to do, and sometimes in an environment that's pretty secluded or rigid, and so you've kind of gone beyond just continuing your life with the benefit of practice, but it sounds like you've reoriented your life to encompass where practice leads you. So I'm curious also how this decision came about and how it's been for you.
I would say that, again, since I was young, I felt that, well, not so connected to that society and the way the system works, and I felt quite a bit detached, but also I felt like people were caught up in the rat race and all that stress around and some often nonsense. And I was about what I always call the real deal thing about things, and I felt like I don't mind to take chances or to take risks about that. And also, there's a couple of things like after the retreats and more retreats, then I started to become much more aware of my karma or karmic energy since I was born. And then in hindsight, I started to see the signs in my life that made me feel different in that sense, and being able to dare. And basically that's the thing that I've heard since I was quite young from different people, family, friends, other people. They're like, wow, you have the courage to do that or take that decision. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be able to take that decision. But for me, it's part of the real deal. And in one way, again, as far as connection to Buddhism and the Buddha, there was, for me, actually, again, that simple sentence that we all know from Buddha's Enlightenment Night, what is stated before sitting there. I have that similar mindset in life, It's like, that's it, I'm committed to that no matter what.
For people
who's going to happen, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
And so it takes that kind of very, focused and strong mindset to say, this is what I'm going to do, this is what it's going to be no matter what happens.
And for people who might not know that statement you're referring to, can you paraphrase it for us?
How did it go again? Well, he was on the path to discover the real ultimate truth, and he felt that he was missing just a couple of things, and he said, okay, tonight I'm going to sit in and meditate until I discover that ultimate truth, no matter what happens, no matter my body might break into pieces, my bones might shatter, which again is, could be a paraphrasing statement of, I may as well die right there, right now. There's something bigger than I must discover. And it's kind of that readiness, that mindset that helps actually to get you beyond the usual ways of living. And I have had that since I was a teenager, the same way. Actually, again, there were many situations where I was like, not afraid to die. It doesn't matter. This is what I'm going to do. And that mindset brings you a lot back. And that's where you discover Dhamma, how Dhamma works in that sense, when you have that readiness of the mind. And but that's what makes you so often more unusual, because, many people are not ready to commit to that extent to some goals or some decisions. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Let's we'll come back to that in a moment, but to go to kind of some of your travels. So I'm curious, when you first came to Asia, where you went and what the reasons for the travel was?
So first it was the Pariyati pilgrimage in northern India.
And Pariyati, for those who might not know, is an organization that disseminates the words of the Buddha and closely connected to the Goenka organization. So you joined a Pariyati pilgrimage in India.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's mostly northern India and then the south part of Nepal, where the Buddha was born, in Lumbini, Kapilavastu.
So that was your first encounter with Asia, and how did that go?
We can say it was interesting. Interesting experience. It was definitely new and definitely like a culture shock in some ways, but you could say there were two aspects. And actually, I don't know if I can say that now, but I just watched another documentary that has been around now lately around the Buddha and the Goenka tradition, and they mentioned some things around that, as much as it was also Goenka's mission to bring back vipassana to India, the birthplace from the Buddha. Then we talk actually about Buddhism, but still India is Hindu and Hinduism. And there is, as much as there are similarities, there are also some major differences. So that would be the two aspects of that, those mixed feelings, basically. it's nice to be and to go to those famous Buddhist places. There is a vibration there, especially in Bodh Gaya and anyway, the main ones like Kushinagar also, where he went into Parinibbana. But at the same time, this is all blended in India and Hindu culture. So you deal with a lot of noise, a lot of people around you, after you, and referring to the documentary that I meant earlier is like they mean that Hinduism has its belief to include the Buddha as one reincarnation of their god, but then at the same time they discarded really Buddhism for so many centuries, right? For a reason. So you bring back Buddhism to its birthplace, but at the same time you're in a country that doesn't care so much about Buddhism, and you feel that really well also. So it was a bit of a mixed feeling in that sense. So, and maybe as a warning for some people, just like the guy did at the time. So you come from that place after often having done those retreats in those nice, comfortable setting, and it's quiet, and you feel committed to become a pilgrim to those famous Buddhist places. Oh, I'm going to be there and meditate with the vibration of the road. And then suddenly you come to a place where there's a lot of activities and a lot of noise, and people are trying to sell you things all around and stuff. So be prepared that it won't be just like a beautiful, quiet spot to meditate on those famous sites.
Yeah. So if India was your first touch with coming to Asia, then soon after that you came to Myanmar for the first time. And what was your initial feeling and experience of being in Myanmar?
There was a sense of coming home, exactly for that difference of feeling, oh, this is what a true general Buddhist culture is about. The attitude of the people was so different, and there we could start to expand on, how Buddhism turns into a religion and how people are conditioned from birth to believe anyway, to behave certain ways. But there's definitely a very different attitude in the behavior of the people who are Buddhist versus another country where it's not the main religion.
Yeah.
And there was a lot to be appreciated of in the line of dedication that the people have.
Such as?
Well, they were... I don't know how to explain. The way you see them, I mean, it's conditioning from childhood, right? But still, the way they all will provide for the monks, for example. Almorans are so popular, I mean, and they will bow so easily, and they will kneel, and, they will respect so much. Again, as a difference to India. Yeah. You don't see that in India. People will just so easily be so in reverence to some other beings in that sense, or to bow so easily and to just be so humble. Yeah, that's the word also, which is a word that I like to use a lot in the practice itself, which can be another topic, but
so how did that affect you?
Being in the surrendering part when you practice Buddhism, which has to do with humility. And it's nice to see many people that can be very easily humble, also coming from the West, where humility doesn't exist that much.
You referenced the impact of seeing the humility and the reverence towards monks that Burmese people showed to monastics, and that had an effect on you. And I guess I'm curious what effect it had on you. So what was that was the outer action that was taking place that you were witnessing, but internally, why was that significant? What was your reaction and effect of witnessing and experiencing this happening?
I think it's because it was relating to the way I always saw it and considered what the Buddha's teaching and Buddhist value were about. Since I was a young teenager, again at the time, I had already that training, I had that mind discipline, and humility was a word that I was using a lot as a teenager that I felt was lacking a lot around. And so suddenly being in a culture where, and I had almost a feeling beforehand that even though I hadn't been to Asia, that I would say, I think, Asian people are easier to have less ego, to be less ego-based in their behavior in many situations. So I was somewhat looking forward to that. And then when I came, it happened in that sense. in many situations, and I really appreciated that at once, like what I related to as from my own practice from back in the days, and what I kind of would have expected or demanded from some other people, that they would be more humble, more respectful, to listen to certain people who are the proper teachers and stuff. So that I could witness there, and then that's exactly what I related to. So I really appreciate it to be inside a culture and an environment where people know how to just respect and listen and be humble, because that's what I always felt was a big element in a practice that also helps a lot.
Right. That kind of leads to the next question, which you kind of touched upon, but there might be more to it. How have your perspectives on Buddhism in general and your own meditation practice been affected or influenced by the time you spent in Myanmar, the 3 trips cumulatively?
It has influenced very positively. It has strengthened the commitment. It has given me a bit of extra depth in some areas. Exactly that. When I see the monks and mostly the more advanced monk, and you see the commitment, I feel the vibration radiates around, and it just compels you. If you're already on the path properly that way, it kind of compels you to go deeper, further along. And I think there's a reason why a few Westerners, when they come here, and the one who are dedicated, they feel like being ordained for a short period too, and it's already a sign in that way. So for me, it was just confirming a lot. It was, as I meant, there was a sense of coming home in some ways, and then there was a sense of strengthening the commitment, confirming that's my path, and to see the level of dedication of many, many people around here.
So one of the motivations of this podcast and some of the other kind of Dhamma work and information I've done is to want to extend the conversation to people that have never come here, that have thought about coming or wanted to know kind of what it's like here, what the experience is. And you've come and spent 3 different visits here, and you've experienced a lot of different things. I'm sure there'd be meditators listening to this who are thinking of their own trip and trying to imagine the experience. And so I wanted to ask you to share some stories and anecdotes of your experiences. Before we were talking more in general terms, but I think it'd be neat to hear some actual stories of how things have unfolded. So the first thing I wanted to ask is maybe some story something that happened that inspired you, some inspiring moment, something that you took away, some lesson of inspiration.
Can I mention that the first time I was here, it was also because you were my guide.
Yes, you can. Everything is allowed on here.
So you could have a say around that then. But maybe you would remember. But for me, as we know that whole practice is around karma. And so there are signs basically in life that way. And I would say that there were a few times when we got to some places and you were like, well, I'm not sure if, this doesn't really happen usually, or this is rare, but it might, let's ask, or let's say, and if it's and then we go to that place and like, oh, that's the day that actually usually they don't take the Buddha relics out, but then actually today the person is there and then is willing to take them out for you to meditate or under the Buddha relics or something like that. So then we went also to IMC, which is International Meditation Center that Sayagyi Bakin created in Yangon, where he made that pagoda. And I always felt that I had also a special connection to Sayagyi Bakin beyond Goenkaji. And when we went there was this older man, you said, who was one of the few left of the old student from Sayagyi Bakin. And he also felt like proposing us to open the pagoda and to get inside and see the center of it. Because I was going to ask you, do you know if it's something that's easy to do usually or not?
What's that?
That they open the old pagoda to people?
No, it's not easy. Yeah. It happens, but it's not easy. So
different events like that, synchronicities that, again, karmic signs in some ways.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. How about a moment where some kind of learning take place? Some insight that happened based on some encounter or conversation or experience in the 2 prior visits? Is there some kind of moment of awakening you could share?
Yes, in some ways. One of them being what we just talked about for the IMC, but exactly because of where I was at already on the path with that awareness from my own past karma, they were actually somewhat things that I secretly expected. And I was like, if this happens, that would be a really good sign and confirmation. So there was that one thing about IMC because of that connection to Ubakin that I have. And so the fact that we got allowed to get inside the pagoda and see the center cell where Ubakin was, for me, was very, very strong. And again, it's just a sense of emphasizing, reinforcing the whole thing. Another thing exactly in the same line, because it has to do with Sayagyi Ubakin, was that back then, the first time I saw a picture of Webu Sayadaw, I felt also a very strong connection to Webu. And I always thought that I wished I could go to Winjin Bin and to his monastery. Both in Xiaosei were in a cave that he meditated, and then at his kuti in his monastery. And that's the thing that we didn't do in the first time, which kind of was a bit disappointed, but that we couldn't just do it, because I felt a strong pull to go to Winjin Bin and to be able to meditate basically, ideally, in Webu Sayadaw's kuti. And last winter that I went there, that was a very, really strong one too. That again reinforced the same way as kind of expected. But for me, it was a very strong experience. That Webu, I looked really high up towards Webu, and exactly again because he's the one who was famous for having the most simple practice as possible, yet being an arahant. So those two in a lineage, going to IMC, being able to go inside the pagoda where Ubakin was, and then to meditate in Webu Sayadaw's kuti, they really settled things pretty strong and deep foundations.
Great. Yeah. How about some kind of anecdote or story that something unexpected happened, something kind of funny, something confusing, out of the ordinary?
That's where I have to take a step. I'm really bad at those things.
Yeah.
that when I'm put on the spot with
Sure.
anecdote, please. I'm like,
yeah.
I cannot come up with anecdote.
I mean, I have led a lot of people on pilgrimages. Sometimes something really special happens that everyone feels, but other times, one of my favorite things to do after a pilgrimage is ended is to ask people, what was the best moment, the most inspiring moment, what's something that, really stands out. And pilgrims often say things I didn't even notice, just because everyone's personal connections and feelings and moments of significance come in kind of unexpected ways. So to give one example, I asked one meditator who went her most profound experience, and she told a story of seeing nuns in a line and making eye contact with one of the Burmese nuns and just breaking into a smile. And I don't know if anyone else noticed that experience, but for her, it was extremely profound to make eye contact and share what she felt was a very deep and sincere smile and wish of goodwill with no words, with a person that didn't necessarily speak the same language. And that nearly brought her to tears, just that moment of connection and sentimentality and feeling. And this was also a meditator that was a little bit nervous coming to a poorer country and not knowing what to expect. And so to have this moment of a deep connection to a nun wearing robes who didn't speak the same language just by a smile and a look was one of the most significant moments of her trip. And so it's always fun to hear, that sometimes they're not things you expect. There's something that from someone's own background and experience strikes them in a deep way that is wonderful to hear and to know, what effect it had on them.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think through things at the same time, and then it depends, because you were asking also about maybe something kind of funny but maybe still, for each main teacher in our lineage in the Goenka tradition, we went to a Pure Way, Sayateji place, And it was also really nice to be able to meditate in his own little corner of the monastery there, in his own little chamber there. And then, but then there was a group of people meditating there, and then there was this woman who really broke into like a little personal crisis, and there was a lot of screaming and crying and stuff. So that was kind of interesting to see how the people were trying to deal with that. We don't really witness that in the West and stuff, but it's a different culture, and people are in one way more in tune and more emotional about things, more like a straight out or instinctive about thing. And so that was a interesting moment. And that compound close to Moniwa from Lady Sayadaw's disciple, that was pretty impressive. That was something it was weird. It's almost like a entertainment park of Buddhism with all kind of structures and architecture and buildings, and that was interesting. But I would say it was still also a powerful experience to go to Lady's Monastery and the cave.
Lady Sayadaw.
Up that mountain with that view, and pretty inspiring too. A little funny situation, as much as, again, this is a Buddhist culture in general, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the way we expect it from the West, and we have, again, some preconceived ideas, how things should look, what Buddhism is about, or how Buddhists should be, and monks especially. Again, people have robes, and we have an expectation to see them this way or that way. And then we went to that place where there was not exactly a cave, it was almost like a little gorge cave on the mountain, and there was this monk there missing a lot of teeth, and they have the betel nut, and he was smoking. That was an interesting, little insight into, okay, there are different aspects to the Buddhist culture, and how Buddhism can look like in a supposedly a real Buddhist culture. That was interesting to see that monk could just smile at us and was chatty, and he was smoking, and so that was another anecdote too.
Yeah, great. Great. So you've talked about some of the inspiring moments and some of the interest of what drove you to the country and being moved by the generosity towards monks. But overall, this is a very traditional Buddhist culture from top down, going back centuries. It's a Buddhist religion, Buddhist culture in Myanmar. And so I'm also curious, coming from a background of just doing pure meditation and having meditation being the driving force, what it's been like being in a Burmese Buddhist culture. So you've talked about coming from a background of meditation and the interest in coming to Myanmar based on the meditation practice and some of the inspiration of being in Myanmar in terms of the reverence and the humility towards monks. But it's also a Buddhist culture and a Buddhist religion here. So I'm curious about what it's been like being in a country that doesn't just have these kind of small moments of inspiration and learning, but kind of the wider, bigger Buddhist culture, how that's influenced you. And
so I would say, just like in general in life, our existence is about duality. So there's always the pros and the cons. So it's basically if you have to make somewhat an opinion about something, not being equanimous, but say, okay, there is positive and negative. That's where also we see a way of life has become a religion. But again, it's we can also go more into details about explaining the definition of words, right, or play with words and definition, because originally of the proper definition of the word religion, which is about the unity, and that's kind of what it looks like sometimes. But at the same time, now we are talking more on a pragmatic level about organized religion aspect. And then on the other hand, that would come on the side where you can feel that, it's a bit too much. It's simple for me because in the sense that Buddhism, the path and the teachings are actually about liberation. So you work towards liberation from conditioning, while exactly when you witness organized religion, it's all about conditioning from birth, and people are conditioned. So you can see that for the young people, they only repeat what they are told, they don't know better than that. So you can see that it's organized religion, and that's something that you can have a little aversion feeling against, because you see that all those people, as much as I appreciate when it's actually from a respect point of view, it's also from a very conditioned point of view. And you can see that it's not them being free from that conditioned mind, that, they make that decision or, to behave that way. It is because they have been conditioned to behave that way. And that's where you can feel that it's a bit too much. And especially in any organized religion, but then especially when you talk about Buddhism, which is known as the path to liberation from conditioning, then to see so many people behaving in a very conditioned way, thinking and feeling that they're doing the right thing, is like a bit on antinomy, you can say. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and there have been some great Burmese Sayadaws and teachers that have criticized aspects of Burmese Buddhist culture. Mahagandhiyon Sayadaw is one, and Oxford Sayadaw, another, who have looked at, some of the traditional and contemporary Burmese Buddhist practices, and Webu Sayadaw was another, and have kind of called out their own culture and saying, you're not really going far enough, and you're not really taking the message as deep as you can. So certainly I think that's an authentic and, genuine response. Yeah. Yeah. So finally, to close, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your own work, because you've written a book yourself and self-published, and you also speak on your own insights, and you've shared those on YouTube, and we'll give at the end, we'll give those titles so people can find it. The first question I have is, it seems like nature has played a big role in your work. You produced a book where half the book was just photographs of Canadian countryside, and so I'm just curious the role that nature has played in your practice.
In some ways, the biggest role and the biggest inspiration, because that happened since childhood. Again, in a way of not feeling like you fit in the system, not fitting your own family, not fitting in your own culture, not fitting in your own school system, which all this seemed so big nonsense, and you start to lose taste for life in some ways, and you're trying to find a meaning to things. Then that's part of the science, when I talk about karmic energy or karma, and then different signs in your life that you can look at in hindsight. Then, often people in that situation start to find refuge in nature. First, we have the refuge in Buddha, refuge in Dhamma, refuge in Sangha. But for me, actually, I had that as, in my own ways, as the refuge in Buddha, as we are told, is not exactly, in the person as a Buddha, but in your Buddha nature. Well, when I felt like that as a kid, I felt like I feel like I'm just counting on myself. I cannot count on anybody else, cannot count on any human, because they are very, dual beings and very unreliable and very, not a lot of nonsense of this society that I don't relate to. So then I felt in nature is real, being about the real deal things. Then I feel like nature is the real deal thing. That's where you have the real ways of being. And again, in Buddhism, or at least in this tradition, we use a lot the word the law of nature. Then I felt those are the real rules that apply, that make sense, versus the laws and rules of the society that were nonsense to me. So I felt refuge in Dhamma, in nature, where I felt it was real life, real things, real ways of being, real values, respectable values there. And the Sangha would be then, again, detaching, like many people, from the human society and find more refuge with animals. So I used to hang out more with animals. And I had, again, very special moments, encounter with wildlife.
Which animals?
Well, I relate a lot to wolves. If you can talk on, in another hand, about, totem animal in other cultures, in First Nation culture and stuff. But since I was a kid, I had a lot of a strong attraction to wolves, and I've had a few encounters with some wolves. But then also observing the eagle in the sky, soaring and circling, it was very inspiring for me. I always felt the appeal of being high up in the mountain. And an example, an anecdote is like, so not fitting even in your own family, then we start to have conversation with my dad, and we argue, and I had all those very clear ideas, which actually are Buddhist values that didn't fit in my French culture. And then we had those conversation, and my dad was like, well, anyway, enough of your own weird philosophies, as going, I would say, that people, to those people, they're just philosophies. For me, it was very real and very pragmatic and very scientific or rational. But so we had this argumentative conversation, and then ultimately my dad would be, anyway, enough of your ways of looking that are so weird, and you should maybe just become a monk one day and just maybe go in a cave. See, I was told that as a teenager. So, and I always felt the appeal since then to also spend time in nature, high up in the mountains, caves. That was very appealing to me already back then.
So have you been a monk in a cave yet?
Not a monk, but I've been in a cave. But I would say that at some point, let's say with my deepest experience, where everything became very clear, then at that moment it's like, well, I may as well become a monk anyway, right then, because it's so clear. The full detachment from everything and worldly things. Then when you experience it from within, then it's almost like, I may just as well. I've had that feeling at that moment, but then I wanted to be realistic about certain things, and meant that I still should stay a lay person for a while anyway, for certain reasons, and exactly to experience more and have more to share in a way of relating to worldly things to other people, so I can keep on having my life experience, worldly experience, so that I can, when I explain things to people, they can relate, because I can explain or give specific examples of when you have a worldly life that they can relate to, and then compare to what I've experienced on the other side. So it makes it easier for people to understand the difference.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So another thing I noticed in your book when I was looking through is that you often reference addiction. It comes up a lot in your writing. And so I'm wondering if you can describe what your definition of addiction, by the way that you mean it, and what role that you feel addiction plays on the spiritual path.
So addiction, yes, to some people, that's where we start to get into the provoking wording of things, but to some people, when we have started to talk about, meditation or Dhamma and stuff, and I can be pretty blunt sometimes, because as Goenka, I'm not into discussing philosophies, it's people like to debate and argue, but ultimately it's either when you have experienced and or then you like to go into theories and philosophies. But I like to say that the human mind works by addiction, actually. And basically, everybody is an addict. And it goes back to the dependent origination, which is a big thing, in Buddhism and Buddha's discovery and teachings. And that's exactly connected to karma in some ways. So the big word at the end that keeps us rolling in samsara is craving and clinging. Well, craving and clinging basically is addiction. So, you have sensations that you're addicted to, and you just want them to be repeated. And as the word means, sensation, it has to do with the senses. So any kind of sense experience, people develop some kind of addiction one way or the other to them, or an aversion. But we all have and live by addiction in some ways to various sense experience from the different senses that we have, the 6 senses. And in that sense, it's also the way maybe Goenka doesn't go too deep into that, but I explain to some people, and that's where people can be surprised by that take or that angle that we have in proper Buddhism, is that the way to look at life. And for example, people are very excited when you have a kid and that's just born and start to develop, and people get excited and look, as Goenka mentioned, quick, like coming to the senses, look, he's developing these senses, he's becoming aware of his senses. What actually you do is that you start to develop your addiction to your senses by discovering them. You start to figure as a kid that you have your sense doors that give you sensations, and you start to have your strong opinion about those sensations. Either you like them or you don't like them. And then actually starting to develop your addictions. And that's what makes it so hard at the end to go the other way, to backtrack on the dependent origination, which is the path, right? It's basically backtracking that. So to the point that ultimately it becomes ultimate detachment from any sensory experience.
Right. Right. Another line that struck me in the book is you said, I'm quoting your book here, you said, people are so scared to be alone, having to face their true self, although there resides the solution to all their problems. Become a meditator, dive deep into your core, through your layers and find your source in connection with the whole, then no loneliness anymore, no need for anything outside anymore to distract or fill up some gap, and only ready to give, share, true compassion, true love, not asking for anything. So one of the things I was struck by this is I was curious how this sentiment that you express about loneliness in your book relates to your own decision to pursue spiritual travel, often on your own and in foreign and remote places. So one of the things I'd like to know is loneliness, a sense of loneliness, has that been an issue for you in your own practice or in your own spiritual travel?
No. The short answer is no, but again, it goes back to being a kid and already having my family telling me, oh, you're not very social anyway, you don't like to hang out with us. But it goes back to not relating to this society and human society with the way they live and the values, and relating more to nature and animals. So then I was already spending time alone and enjoying that I had more meaningful connection spending time in nature or with animals than with humans. So I always had that strength supporting me behind that way, so that I always knew that I would find strong, deep, valuable connections, meaningful connection by being with nature and animals. So being alone or not didn't matter. On the other hand, and also because for a while I worked in hospitality and I was a guide, I really like to share, and I got very good feedback from clients many times when I was guiding, because they felt that I had that passion to share that type of connection to nature, to the elements, to the world, to the earth, and to animals. And so many people appreciated that, and they could sense that I had that deep passion, because for me that was the real thing again, that connection. But then, it's just that basic thing, and some other famous mystics or spiritual teachers over the generations have mentioned this thing that there's that huge difference between aloneness and loneliness. And many people feel lonely, and as we know, many people feel lonely in a city, even if they have friends, versus aloneness.
Solitude.
If you can do it for quite a while with introspection, then we'll start to give you this answer, and actually will allow you ultimately to connect, if you don't freak out by being alone, but rather accept and settle down in that situation, then you can start to experience those deeper connection to real thing as nature elements. Even like we talk about in Buddhism, the 4 basic elements. You might start. I've spent countless hours sitting on top. An anecdote is that in France, especially, I enjoyed really skiing. And always since I was a kid, and as I meant, I really enjoyed spending time high up in the mountains. I always felt the inspiration. I always liked to be able to stay high up in the mountain when it gets all quiet from the society. But in France, ski patrol never let you stay, of course, after hours. So I had to hide. So I was hiding from them after they closed the runs and the lifts. And so I could just spend time sitting high up in the mountain.
The entire night, or?
No, just until sunset, because skiing down in the dark is not easy. Right. But sunset have always been, that way also important in some ways. But just that opportunity to sit by yourself high up in the mountains. And, of course, you have the typical pictures of all those yogis, whatever, cartoon pictures, comic pictures of, sitting high up in the mountain alone is often the classic image of what brings you depth into the understanding of life and how everything relates. And so for example, I was doing that already as a teenager. Again, I was trying to be able to be left alone, quiet, high up in the mountains. That's an example.
Right. So you also, in this sentence, you present a kind of solution to the condition of loneliness as being, in your words, you say, become a meditator. So do you see the transformation into a meditator as something that can respond to the condition of loneliness?
Yes, of loneliness, yes. It goes back, and I had figured that one as a teenager, that, the famous know thyself. And again, I was like, by going within, actually, I have a feeling that I will find all the answers that I need. And actually, as a teenager, I remember doing that from my own practice, that I was like, I want to find all the answers to my question before I'm 20 years old. So I'm going to meditate and find those answers by going within. And actually, it worked out for me back then. I got all the main answers I was looking for about the meaning of life, the why this society is like that, human nature and stuff around that time, by meditating on my own and spending that time in nature on my own and stuff. So I became aware that all the answers lay within yourself. And again, it's all about if you manage to not freak out by the idea of being alone and go within. But if you can do the proper work of just observing, just go inside and see what happened. And it's that simple, right? Again, it's funny enough, that whole rule of asking people to do the most simple thing in the world that a human can be asked to do becomes the hardest one for most. It's just sit with yourself and just go within and see what happens, see what's in there, what comes up over time without freaking out, and it's okay. And then you will discover a lot of interesting things. And actually, to answer better, I guess, your question for the other part, then at some point you start to actually connect to more and more and more, and to maybe more meaningful things that you wouldn't have guessed before. You have your superficial connection to people, to being, as being social, that you feel like helps you, and that takes away the feeling of loneliness because you have social interactions. But then you become again dependent on that, or you can become addicted to that, right? Because then again, many people cannot stand to suddenly find themselves alone. But then on the other hand, it's as it is known, basically, if you can do the proper work that way, to spend a lot of time alone and go within, then you will start to connect to many, many more exciting things, and a lot of things, and life, meaning, and universe, and energies, and a lot of things.
And you also in the sentence again, going back to it, you juxtapose the condition of loneliness with the development of true love and compassion. And that's curious how you bring those together. So what relation do you see true love and compassion arising out of a situation of loneliness that's being observed?
Yeah, I don't know if I could mention, because I've been a fan for a long time from another very famous mystic who actually at the time was a bit in a competition with Goenka back in the days in India. And he's very good at explaining that.
Who's that?
Osho.
Osho.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Osho has been very, as much as he has been all controversial and everything, but has been really good at explaining bluntly, clearly, many, many things. And I like often to refer to him as far as this take of aloneness versus loneliness. But basically, and going back to the proper Buddhism anyway, is true love can only happen when you have dropped that ego, that selfish interest, that self-centeredness. That's what we at least agree as Buddhists on, versus what many people think love is. So true love and compassion only happens after the ego is dropped, the self-interest is dropped, the selfishness, the self-interest. And aloneness, with the time spent going within, is exactly what will get you there. So that's the two part, basically. What we just talked about before, spending time alone, meditating, going within, you find your own true nature, you find connection to so much else, and the ego start to fade off. And I remember also being young, you start, again, you can only feel humble thinking about you as a tiny little person compared to the rest of nature, to the forces of nature which rules us anyway, that we are dependent upon. And then the universe again. Nowadays, it's nice also when they have those little videos about, people who freak out about small things, and then they feel that they are so important and something, and then it's like, okay, take another perspective. You are just a tiny little human on the planet Earth, in the solar system, in the universe. So, you know what? But aloneness allows you to connect to those different scale of things and look at things in a different way. And that way, ego can only just drop over time. And once ego and that huge notion of me, self, so important is dropped, then things turn around, shift around, as it's not about me anymore, it's about the others. Then you're available for true love and compassion.
Yeah. Great. So to wrap up, to bring this all together, given your belief in the power of aloneness and how the role that's played in your spiritual practice, what lies ahead for you in Myanmar in this visit? What kind of experience or place are you pursuing or hoping to find to further your spiritual practice on this, your third visit, the country you keep coming back to?
Because another part, actually, maybe I didn't answer exactly one question earlier,
Sure.
but there was a part of it as also what is a little bit funny, and the anecdote is when you go to those famous places or pagoda with views, and then you have all those young monks who comes to you. The young monks, they are eager to practice a bit English, and ask questions to tourists, and so that's an aspect that's also interesting in there. And I feel the connection to that, and I've met some sayados and young monks. They like the foreigner part, but then when they find someone that they feel that to them that understands Dhamma, is really into the Dhamma and the practice, and then they can practice the English. They are very eager, to learn and to practice with you. And so I've been asked from a few places to come back and to share both, to share the Dhamma and help the monks practice English. And that becomes the classic thing, for foreigners, as an idea of spending time easily in this country and in a form of exchange. So that I really enjoy. So I want to again go to some places that are meaningful to me and spend some time there for my own practice, connection deep down to those grounds of strong Dhamma from famous teachers, and then also give that way to monasteries where I've been asked to come back, and maybe some new ones, just to satisfy to the eagerness of the young monks to practice their English and to talk about Dhamma and stuff. Because since my life is really about Dhamma mainly right now, so that's
Yeah. So just final question that we want to ask to everyone that comes on here. This podcast is also meant for people who have never been to Myanmar, thinking about coming, maybe people who have come, but they want to learn more about it. So with each guest, we'd like to ask a recommendation. If someone was coming to Myanmar, a meditator was coming, or someone interested in meditation, maybe they haven't have much of a background, or maybe they're advanced. But if they were to come, they were to spend 2 weeks here, or 3 months here, or 1 year here, what advice would you give them of what to do with their time? So what advice would you give to someone coming for 2 weeks, for 3 months, and for 1 year to get the most out of the Dhamma experience? Based on your personal spiritual experience, based on your personal travel experience in Myanmar, what advice would you give if someone had a time frame of 2 weeks, 3 months, and 1 year?
Okay, but I think also there are two aspects, depending on still what mindset or what main goal the person has, because the one thing, as you know, Myanmar has opened up a lot to tourism, and of course, like many of the countries in that way, they really want to get more and more tourists coming because that will bring income and everything. So either you come mostly from the touristic aspect of you, or you really come as a real meditator and really about Buddhism specifically, because exactly in that little short period that I've had since my first time, I've seen and experienced the difference. I see now again more and more of that backpacker culture coming in, but at the same time, people who maybe want to see a bit or want to ask a bit about what Buddhism is about, but actually they don't. It's more about let's go and check Myanmar, what it is, because now it's opened up. It's nice. They have beautiful temples, beautiful monasteries, and it's a different culture. So it's open now. So let's check it out before it changes too much. But then actually they don't have much interest in Buddhism. So it really depends what the main focus is. And
imagining a person interested in Buddhism. So someone interested coming for the first time, they want to explore the Dhamma, one person has 2 weeks, one has 3 months, and one has 1 year. What advice would you give for them to use the most of their time to see the Dhamma and experience the Dhamma here?
So if it's to experience the Dhamma, I would say, I still think it's a combination. For tourism, Myanmar has so many beautiful places to show, and architecture and temples and many different things. So if you have 2 weeks, you should combine half and half, maybe the way I did the first time. Go to the famous places around Buddhism and Dhamma, and famous monasteries, or where there were some famous sayadaw, or still some famous sayadaw, and then still see the main touristic sites, the classic 4 or 5 points, like, Yangon and Bagan and Inle and Mandalay and kind of, the main places, I guess. And then go to the main temples, the big monasteries, the famous place. 3 months, then, I don't know, then it's more like split in half, then maybe half, again, the touristy and famous places, and then a little half of self-exploration. There to go a bit off the beaten track and, let the synchronicity happen. But it depends on your level of dedication too. Maybe for 3 months, someone can still try to ordain for 1 week or 2 weeks, at a place that they feel a connection.
Ordain as a monk.
Yeah.
Or nun.
Yeah. And then for a year, I don't know, I haven't done it even myself.
Okay.
But I would say the same at a bigger scale. Yeah, take some time to explore, try to explore a lot to get a better sense of the culture in general and the pros and cons that you find personally, compared to your own liking and opinion. And then if you find a place that you have an affinity for, and especially if you come for the Dhamma purpose and you're on the path, probably try to connect to a monastery and spend quite a bit of time there.
So choose one monastery and teacher.
And then for your own practice and maybe ordain again for a few months at least, but dedicate your time to one monastery afterwards. After you have been around, explore a bit outside the usual path, and if you get a feeling that there was this one place that felt special to me that I really like, and maybe go back basically, and that's another thing that we discover here, right? It's compared to what I said earlier, that monasteries are so open to welcome people and welcome foreigners. I mean, it's so easy that to just stay at places. That's, again, it's something really nice with this country that's still happening. I don't know if it's gonna be for a long time like that, but how monastery can still be open and welcoming to foreigners and just to stay. And I mean, if you can, of course, handle the lack of Western luxury and comfort and convenience, again, which should be part of the being on the path, is not to expect the whole comfort or luxury of nice hotels, but as far as Dhamma purpose, you may as well at some point connect to a monastery and spend an extensive time there. I think it would be a good experience. And helping the monks and helping them on alms rounds and the whole experience, but around one specific place that you felt a connection to. After having explored for yourself first and get a better sense of the different aspects. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we also wanted to make sure to mention where people can find more about your writings and the talks that you've given. So the book that you self-published is called Awareness, Nature-Inspired Quotes on Existence. It's available as ebook and physical book on Amazon. And you also have a YouTube channel where you've given some talks that can be freely accessed, and you can search his shortened name, Seb, LN. So that's first word SEB and then LN to access more of your writings and your talks. And hopefully there will be more coming soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And best wishes on your upcoming spiritual journey in Myanmar. And if you pass through here on your way out, then we can check in again about what those experiences were like.
Sure. That would be nice. Thank you so much.
Melissa Coates, hailing from 29 Palms, California. Or actually, I don't know exactly where you are. You're at Ruth Dennison's place, aren't you, Melissa?
Joshua Tree.
Ah, that's pretty close, isn't it?
Yeah, just down the road.
So.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know who Ruth Dennison is, could you tell us a little bit about who Ruth Dennison is?
Sure. She was also a student of Sayagyi U Ba Khin, the same teacher who appointed Goenkaji as a teacher. And he also appointed her as a teacher. And she started this little center out in the desert here in Joshua Tree in the 70s. And it still exists and looks very much like her house.
Uh-huh.
Grandma's House Meditation Center.
Is that what it feels like?
It does. It has this really sweet grandma's house feel.
But she's no longer with us, is that right?
No, she passed away. I don't remember what year, but not too far off from Goenkaji also.
Ah, okay. Right. Is it similar to what Goenka teaches there? And do they still is there a kind of a system? Is it similar to Ubikin? I've heard she has her kind of own style of like incorporating gardening and dancing and.
It is, as far as form goes, it's unrecognizable to the Goenka system that really, as far as I understand, modeled Ubakin's format. Yes, definitely including movement and very individualized teachings. So like different people coming in with different needs, or people coming in with traumas who can't sit 10 hours a day for 10 days. It's more flexible. And in a way, I think of it as a place that like catches folks who might fall through the cracks at Goenka centers in a way.
Oh, cool.
With having more like individualized attention from a live teacher. And her student, Irina Weissman, took over the center after Ruth passed away. And Ruth was the first person to hold women's Buddhist meditation retreats in the 70s. And Irina was the first to hold LGBT retreats in the 90s. And in recent years, the center has started having people of color retreats and just creating safe space for people to come into the Dharma who might not feel safe enough or drawn enough in other places, in like bigger Western Dharma centers.
Sounds like a real intention of being proactively inclusive. That's great.
Yeah, it definitely makes the Dharma more accessible to certain groups of people. Yeah, individuals from diverse backgrounds.
That's great. Well, we're actually here to talk about Sebastian's interview. Do you want to, you're better at French than I am. Do you want to say his name?
Sebastien Le Normand.
Yeah, there's no way I could say that. But yeah, we're here to discuss Sebastian's interview. And yeah, just the first thing I got to say out of the gate about the interview is like, it was actually our first recorded interview done quite some time ago. And interesting, I just edited a very recent interview, which will come out quite soon as well. So to have these two next to each other is quite funny. I've heard of other podcasters as well. When they go back and listen to their first episodes, it's they kind of cringe just because there's so much learning that happens in the first series of interviews. Well, that being said, what did you think of the interview? You gave it a listen to recently, so I'd like to hear your thoughts. Yeah, what stood out to you?
There was so much I identified with in his interview, and just really common themes that actually a lot of Dharma journeyers that I met in Myanmar have had similar kind of arcs of taking a course or sitting some meditation retreat somewhere and then feeling a call to go further and kind of look towards the roots or see how they can get closer and learn more, then ending up in Myanmar, adventuring to either the Sayagyi Uba Kin Center or to monasteries here and there, and then having all kinds of synchronicities unfold and having a real deepening in so many unexpected ways of our practice. This is just like common threads that I've seen in so many people's experience, my own included, of being so inspired by the culture and the dedication of the monastics and the energy or vibration of the monastics, and it strengthening our practice all around, our the depth and understanding. And yeah, it almost sounds like a classic story.
Right. I had that same kind of connection as well, similar kind of story arc. I mean, I had a lot of parallels actually with with Sebastian's story. Going right back to the very beginning of the journey is really this kind of not really fitting in totally with mainstream society.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily being opposed to it either on my end, but, and I wasn't quite as deep into other things as he was even as a teenager. That was quite impressive. But I was already starting to bend out and move away. I went down a slightly different path first involving like psychedelics and the Grateful Dead. But my next step was nature, as well. So I was very much called to nature. I lived in the Colorado mountains after college for several years. And then that was kind of the bridge between going into the inner nature of things. It's like a psychology degree in university and a religious studies degree. And then being just my mind was leaning that way. And then, there's that feeling that I'm just not going to probably be a 9-to-5er with 2.5 kids and living in the suburbs like my parents were, but nothing wrong with that, but I just wasn't quite like that, so there's that, whatever you want to call it, like, for lack of a better term, setting off on some kind of hero's journey, like so many of us have done.
I like that he was referring to it as the real deal, like the real deal that he was finding in nature, and then like finding kind of like the real deal in the like uncontrived, or I don't, what's the word, like in the way like monastics are in the world. It's like a very natural way of being that isn't subscribing to the societal stories of what we're supposed to value and how we're supposed to behave, even though there are very strict set like guidelines for behaviors for monastics, but it's really outside of and separate from standard conventional culture and cultural values.
Right. What's interesting, as you say that, there's still that line that Buddha draws, though, that doesn't want that life to be totally separate. He didn't allow monastics, for example, to grow their own food and to be self-sustainable. So separate and engaged in something different, and yet not separated, like still there was some connection, so that there was always this bridge for anyone to be able to move from one to the other and back, so.
Right. And as I was listening to Sebastian's interview, I was thinking like, oh, I'm just waiting for Sebastian to become a monk. And then Joe asked something about that. And, it sounds like Sebastian's dad also is saying like, oh, why don't you just go become a monk in a cave if you just like being on the mountain by yourself?
Right.
But he says that, his practice has given him more to share with others, and actually makes he can help share the teachings in a relatable way to the world, in a way people can understand. And there's a way that our practice, even though we go for whatever periods of time into this intentional solitude, into this aloneness, and sit and go within, it actually, at least in my experience and the experience of a lot of meditators that I know, it actually makes us more available or more intimate when we do come back in our relationships, in how we connect with other people, rather than making us more alienated, more lonely. There's that opening to a deeper intimacy in our own experience through our practice, being more at home in our bodies, more present with what's happening moment to moment. And that translates into this presence that we can offer others.
That's interesting, yes, because there is certainly that benefit. Those of us that, it may sound to us as we listen, and perhaps to a lot of our listeners too, that this is a very familiar story arc. At the same time, if we step back and look at what we might call normal society or normal people, which I don't consider myself to be, we're quite different, it's not so many people. Of course, within our own crowd, so to speak, it's quite normal. But a lot of us, like you're saying, still have these connections to to others outside of that crowd. And I think that's what you're speaking towards.
Mm-hmm.
I did find that sometimes that could go a bit too far, though. So it was always really good to have like spiritual friends, because if I found myself surrounded by what we might call the normal people, for lack of a better term, there was a bit of loneliness. On the one hand, a lot of them would be drawn to such conversations and such contemplations, and perhaps even like want to go engage in their own hero's journey, which might include like some like quite deep spiritual pursuit. And so that was always fulfilling. On the other hand, overall, there often felt like a certain depth I couldn't go to, because that would be too much, that could cause people to kind of recoil back and say, no, that's too far for me. And then, so there's no subjects I had to keep to myself, but the degree to which I could go deep into those subjects in a Dhammic kind of way was, I was very careful, because I didn't want to like traumatize someone, so to speak, with some of the ideology or the depth of the practice, which is actually, when you're going there, it's actually quite a beautiful thing. But at a distance, it can seem kind of alarming. Like, I'll have to give up that, or like I won't love what I love now. Like that can seem kind of put offish or even threatening.
Right.
And so there was always this kind of
right.
I kind of I had to learn that the hard way. Because I think I was very unskillful for quite a long time with trying to just share everything I knew.
Me too.
And then you can do that with people that have had that depth, But, so having a balance of both sides was important to me.
Right. So that's something, it is possible that our practice, I did see it with other people actually, can create a greater sense of alienation and create greater separation and more relational pain and things like that. And I think initially after I started sitting Goenka retreats, and I was trying to get my family to come and trying to get people to come and being like, why doesn't anybody want to do this? Why don't they understand that this is valuable? Or why, like I had this great experience. How come no one's listening? And creating the frustration and, more like a deeper sense of like loneliness or isolation because nobody was coming to do this with me.
Right.
And eventually, I learned the hard way that that's not the way. I've heard other people phrase it as be a Buddha, not a Buddhist. And I'm like, yeah, just show up with love and kindness and care and deep loving presence, and people respond and become curious about what you're doing anyway.
Right.
And when I was at the Pa'ak monastery, I had disrobed, and it was like the day I was going to leave to go back to California, and another nun, she saw me and she was like, what are you doing? Like, why would you disrobe? And, I said, my parents, this would be really hard for them. They wouldn't understand. And she said, oh, my parents didn't, so I just cut them off. And I thinking of that as an option for myself, I'm like, oh, that would cause so much distress and pain and everything in myself, in my whole family. Like, that's not a route that I could go. And through me being flexible and, not insisting that I come back in robes and have my family call me by this name and do my weird things like not eat dinner and everything, people in my family have started meditating and have joined me. And if I was really hard-lined and came off as basically a religious fanatic to them, it would have turned them off to meditation completely. That wouldn't have even been possible. And now my dad loves metta practice, and he meditates on his own, and other extended family relatives have started meditating. And for me, that was the more appropriate route to go.
Right. I mean, it's different for different people. I actually did go back to my family in the U.S. in robes with all my funny I mean, it's not funny to me, but it's funny, if you step back and look at it from a bigger picture, like a guy wearing funny clothes and shaved head walking around Walmart with his mom, but my family knows, I I could kind of do almost anything as long as it wasn't harmful, and they wouldn't be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
So internally within the family, that was all good, for the most part with most people. But yeah, it's different for different people. And there is there's no pat formula for what you should and shouldn't do. You kind of have to feel into it. And there's this hero's journey comes with a whole skill set that has to be learned, how to be in the world, like how to nurture yourself and get the support. So there's that balance that, because a lot of the practice can feel quite good and quite wholesome and and if you're trying to share that with people that are interested in it, that's painful. But there are people that are interested in it. You just kind of have to learn to discern. That rhymes. It's funny. Learn to discern.
Right.
Really, I was not skillful in this, and in that lack of skillfulness, I was harming myself actually. So, and then often I would project it on, they just don't get it, you know, and that's just an expression of my own pain.
Right.
It was very personal. That was like ego, essentially. The I wants other eyes to join, and that's just that was the wrong message to the wrong people, Right. And there's nothing wrong with them, they're just living their lives, and they get what they get. They've got their own conditions. And that was an interesting point Sebastian brought up, that understanding, taking this more into the Burmese context of Burmese locals and the way Burmese practice in Buddhism. That was something he had talked about, just understanding the Burmese through a set of, everyone's basically a collection of conditions. And so, that was one of the themes too, that this comes up in a lot of our interviews with people, that the ones that travel to Myanmar and have this perhaps expectation of this is another learning curve that the one we were talking about before is really kind of within our own communities, perhaps, and how we relate or disengage or feel disoriented or whatever that might be, and working through that. Another one is visiting Myanmar, because, as a Western Dhamma practitioner, the orientation is very different than growing up Buddhist in a Buddhist country, and so there's a lot. So I come over here kind of self-righteous with all these expectations of who and how they ought to be. And I won't say I've shaken all that, but that's a whole nother learning curve of learning what the reality is without being judgmental,
Right.
There's that whole disappointment. I don't know if you went through this. I was a bit disappointed at first, and I was not disappointed, but kind of judgmental that they should be doing it like this. And then there's really that kind of insight that Sebastian had of, and Sebastian, if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, I apologize. His insight was conditions, which is applying the Dhamma itself and that understanding and wisdom to these events that we can experience in our lives. And I think that's a great learning curve as well.
Yeah, coming from the West, let's see, I think I came in with a bit of a different mind frame than actually a lot of Westerners to some degree. So I'm half Korean, and I moved to Korea when I was 25. I was born and raised in California, very California. And then living in Korea, but working in expat English teacher zones, and actually encountering a lot of condescending racism from basically Americans and Canadians toward Koreans, kind of misunderstanding cultural values or expressions, or just racism about food, and just kind of all across the board, encountering that and feeling really disturbed by it. I kind of when I'm traveling in Asia, or when I went to Myanmar, I get kind of weary of expat communities sometimes, and I have an expectation in some way that I'm going to be encountering people saying racist things or stereotyping and misunderstanding, making lots of judgments and criticisms that aren't seeing a bigger picture or aren't understanding a cultural context. And like I encountered so much condescension basically from Westerners towards Asian cultures. Also, I lived in China for a little bit, same thing. And so, though I do find criticisms coming up that, I'm seeing, especially about sexism and things in Myanmar, I'm really weary of that, or like reflective on it in myself if it's coming through this conditioned colonial lens that Westerners have when they go to, say, Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I found I'm totally guilty of that. And when I did a bit of a deeper dive into it, it's not only, in addition to the conditioning you're talking about, it felt to me mostly at an emotional level, just like a way to deal with my discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I was uncomfortable. I didn't feel good. I was just in a foreign as in unfamiliar. And so in my discomfort, one thing to do is to kind of lash out at that which you don't feel comfortable with, as if that's the problem.
Right.
So it can be looked at in a content sense, but really as I looked underneath it, it was more driven by an emotional feeling of just feeling stressed, And sometimes I didn't even see the amount of stress I was holding. And then so once I saw the amount of stress, I'm like, wow, this is pretty stressful. Like my mind kind of normalized the stress. So I didn't see that. And then would kind of, the self would grasp onto the content and try to make it try to make myself believe it was valid.
Right.
But really it's all just a way to kind of lash out and express the stress, but in a very ignorant ways.
To blame it on something.
Yes, exactly. That's what it felt like to me, at least. And so, Sebastian's pretty quick on his insights. It took me quite a bit longer, that mind still arises.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a mind that sees that and a mind that feels the stress. Just how can I relax into this, both in the moment, but also in a more long-term way, If I can't relax into it, I've actually become quite toxic for everyone, myself and everyone around me.
Right.
And the problem isn't, if I was to follow and make the Thai people and the Burmese people when I was living there to follow all my suggestions, it's ridiculous. It's really like me trying to change the whole world.
Right.
To make me feel comfortable is what it's really about,
Right. It's from Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva. He talks about trying to cover the entire world with leather rather than put shoes on your own feet.
Yeah, right. It's absurd.
Yeah, and it's our conditioned tendency. And
yes.
It gets revealed in this mind experiment of moving to a new place and just delving into practice and going within and getting to observe and seeing those patterns coming up again and again. And the habits of judgment, the habits of criticism, of blaming or shaming ourselves and others, and just getting to unravel that through the practice of sitting and observing.
Yeah. With the balance of neither lashing out and harming others, nor turning it in on ourselves and saying, I shouldn't be like this, really to kind of be relaxed and see, wow, that's interesting. That's what this mind does in these conditions.
Right.
And there's so much insight in these kinds of things. So it was nice to see that, there was insights in the journey itself that weren't always sitting on the cushion.
Right. Right. There's so much that comes up through the cultural context of just, being in Myanmar, being in a Buddhist culture when we are coming from a very non-Buddhist, intense capitalist culture.
Right.
Yeah, so much unravels in that also.
Would I be any different if I was born here? I don't think so. I think mind is mind, and mind in the same if the mind has exact same external and internal conditions, now I'm starting to understand that mind will do the same thing. what's outside of that? You know, like, what other things are going to come in and do something different with all the exact same internal and external conditions? So, of course, I don't know if we ever get the exact same conditions twice. That's why there's so much variety. But the arrogance that goes with that variety, right? I think my unique set of conditions, I tend to think is sometimes better.
Right.
So I'm the one that understands, and these people don't. You
Right.
know, back to what you were saying before, it's like the crowd back at home also. It's like, in the way that there was a stress too, were we not lashing out at them because of a discomfort, where we had kind of stepped away from what was comfortable and then couldn't just bring that back and be comfortable with everything. Like we weren't getting that comfort. And then like, hey, you don't get it. Like these people just don't get it.
Right.
It's interesting. I've never heard anyone talk about that. There's these just kind of stages, like the hero's journey, that you just have to learn, you know. And I found that Dhamma itself is like there's these insights along the way of the kind of the bigger arc, you know, that these different phases of how to come back into your community with the gifts and do that skillfully. Right. How to visit these lands where these things came from that are so foreign, and be skillful, you know, internally and externally.
Right. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of willingness to self-reflect really deeply, and just like the humility and the humbleness that it takes to stay open, the strength that it takes to stay open. There's so many qualities that, you know, I could really hear in Sebastian's interview and just see in our own journeys and those other folks that I met in Myanmar who are really going for it.
Right. And there's that appreciation, right? Sebastian really, he was talking about like, once you kind of commit in a sense and go for it, that the ground kind of comes up under your feet as you step off into the unknown to support you, you know, that kind of feeling. Right. And Sebastian talked a lot about serendipity, and, it's something I really relate to as well. For me, it was very strong in India. India is like the serendipity capital, the center of the universe, you know, serendipity center. Actually, one of Sri Lanka's ancient names was Serendip, and that's apparently where the name comes from.
Wow.
Yeah, for me, though, it was a huge part of my path, especially during the Goenka years. You know, this is a slightly different, it's quite a bit different tradition than what I practice now. But I mean, in a sense, it's kind of talked about in that tradition. And then, you know, so I went to India. I've been to India lots of times, but I went once with my mom to like Bodh Gaya and all the other holy places, and had like really magical things happen. And then I went to Myanmar with Goenka. The first time I went to Myanmar, first two times I went to Myanmar was with a big entourage of Goenka meditators, you know, 350, 450 people, you know, from all over the world. And, and yeah, it was just like one magical thing after another. And you're just like, this has to be it. This is so many signs pointing forward, you know, and so much support coming along.
Right.
How about you?
Totally. On various journeys. Yeah. To Kathmandu and, to Dharamsala, Maklodganj, just like, and all over in my time in Myanmar, just signs pointing me to certain places, allowing myself to flow intuitively and just finding guidance and support in all these different ways, of all these serendipitous things happening, or just the right thing coming right at the right moment, or just some interaction with someone that ended up being such a powerful teaching. Those kinds of things would happen all the time.
One thing I've noticed since then, though, I mean, there was a time when I really thought that was it, you know, and then I sort of got carried away with all that, in the sense that, you know, if it's working like that, it's working. And if it's not working like that, then there's something wrong. And that's not necessarily the case. So that was a phase for me too, where I had developed a type of faith at that time that wasn't necessarily based on anything tangible. It was a lot of feeling in it. And I guess I started to load up too much meaning in that. And then so the Dhamma, we're being touched at six sense doors all the time. Whether if we're aware of that, it doesn't mean the magic's always going to be there. So I had to learn about life in between those gaps too. That's just as much Dhamma as that magic. So it's like some of the Christians would call those like the miracles of the path. That are actually quite common. They're not miraculous at all. After a while, they're just part of the spiritual journey. But there are those. It's not a whole life of constant miracles from moment to moment. So, if the mind had become kind of attached to those events,
we suffer dukkha.
Right. And so I think I'm at a place now, those things do happen occasionally still, but perhaps not as intense and as often as they were at that time. It was just like a stream of constant.
Mm-hmm.
But I still feel just as engaged. It's almost like it was a power boost that maybe I needed at a certain stage. And now I'm at this place where, it doesn't matter whether that happens or not. And it still does sometimes, but it's sort of quieter and can be more mundane, or actually can be more suffering at times, internally or externally. And I still feel deeply engaged in the Dhamma. Well, it's interesting that almost like it's like those things are the things that perhaps are arising to be present, that help out. Maybe that's the miracle. That's the magic.
Helping us learn.
It just feels, maybe I just gotten used to it. It just feels a bit more mundane now, which is I'm totally comfortable with.
Yeah, and just helping us like learn not to crave for like special states or special things to happen or something to happen that makes us feel special.
Right.
Yeah, or magical or whatever.
Right.
Even though those things are quite nice, they're still happening to me a lot at Dhammadina here. Like a little finch landed on my head the other day, or recently while I was meditating, and a bunny touched my toe while I was meditating. just the creatures gathering around as I meditate.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's this spiritual posters of people meditating with this, beams of beautiful light around them, and all the animals of the forest are there, like peacefully together.
Yeah, even when those magical cosmic signs aren't being sent our way, like we have trust in the path from our experience, from this internal bearing, like from what has shifted in our lives from our practice. And that phrase he mentioned, that Dhamma works, like just letting the path unfold naturally and not coming in with expectations of how we're supposed to be or what our experiences are supposed to be, and just being willing to observe, and seeing the craving and intensity of that addictive mind that's constantly seeking for this or that diminish over time. That's the power of the practice and the path and the teachings. And there's so much support. And going to a place like Myanmar, like it just opens up whole dimensions of understanding that, and of understanding how much Sangha exists in the world and what's available to us. And so, yeah, I feel so lucky. Sebastian is so lucky, like all of us, to have encountered these teachings in this life. And may we all make the most of it. This really special opportunity to practice and go deep and awaken.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, 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 friend.
I'd like to take a moment to describe what our aim was in creating this podcast series. Our motivation is reflected by the in-depth discussions we have with a wide range of guests in 3 categories of related information. First, we hope to educate and motivate listeners in their own practice through the inspiring individual lives of meditators sharing their experiences and perspectives within the Burma Dhamma. Second, we want to help meditators in gaining a deeper understanding of the history of Myanmar, such as its context, culture, and religion, so that they can better appreciate how and where their own practice fits into the Golden Land's rich Dhamma history. We do this through interviews around scholarly works related to Buddhist Burma, And finally, we hope we can help listeners gain a deeper appreciation of the richness of current Burmese Buddhist issues and how Buddha Dhamma has manifested in the Golden Land, which we get through a catch-all category, a potpourri of developments that can help shine a light on modern Myanmar, particularly its Buddhist context. Well, those are our goals, and we hope you found value in this particular show. If so, I want to bring up a general reminder that there is a minimum cost associated with every episode, and we are 100% listener supported. If you would like to hear more content like the show you just heard now, please take a moment to consider giving a donation to keep our engine running. If you would like to join in our mission to share the Dhamma from the Golden Land more widely, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Every cent goes immediately and directly to sustaining the programming. You can give right on our website via credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation or through PayPal by going to paypal.me/insightmyanmar. We also take donation through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. In all cases, simply search Insight Myanmar on each platform and you'll find our account. Alternatively, you can also visit our website for specific links to any of these respective accounts, or feel free to email us at info@insightmyanmar.org. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, spelled INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you for your kind consideration. You have been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We would appreciate it very much if you would be willing to rate, review, and/or share this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. If you are interested, you can subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information at www.insightmyanmar.org. That's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you cannot find our feed on your podcast player, please let us know and we will ensure that it can be offered there. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, request specific questions, and join in our discussions on the Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You are also most welcome to follow our Facebook and Instagram accounts by the same name of Insight Myanmar. And if you're not on Facebook, you can also message us directly at burmadhamma@gmail.com. That's BURMADHAMMA@gmail.com, and we're also active on Dhamma Wheel. If you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum here. Finally, we're open to suggestions about guests or topics for future episodes, so if you have someone or something in mind, please do be in touch. We would also like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, especially our two sound engineers, Martin Combs and Tharng A. There's of course Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing. Dragos Bandita and Andre Francois produce original artwork, and a special Mongolian volunteer who is asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. We'd also like to thank everyone who assisted us in arranging for the guests we have interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come and share such powerful personal stories. Finally, we are immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We also remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily reflective of the host or other podcast contributors. Please also note, as we are mainly a volunteer team, we do not have the capacity to fact-check our guest interviews. By virtue of being invited on our show, there is a trust that they will be truthful and not misrepresent themselves or others. If you have any concerns about the statements made on this or other shows, please contact us. This recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast and may not be used without the expressed written permission of the podcast owner, which includes video, audio, written transcripts, and excerpts of any episodes. It is also not meant to be used for commercial purposes. On the other hand, we are very open to collaboration, so if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. As you know, our podcasts are 100% listener supported. We welcome your contribution in any amount, denomination, and transfer method. You may give via Patreon at patreon.com/insightmyanmar, via PayPal at paypal.me/insightmyanmar, or by credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you'd like to give especially to support our new run of coronavirus episodes, please go on the GoFundMe site and search Insight Myanmar to find our campaign. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us. Thanks, and see you next show.
Yeah.